Okay, so this is Danny and Athena again. Now, just to say, this channel used to be called Angel Dancer. However, we feel God is shifting our focus a little bit. So now we are called The Bridge. So in this video, we want to talk about whether God is going to send the wilderness people, especially those that have been out of church for some time. Is God going to send you back in there? We're going to connect what we believe God is doing with the wilderness people. We'll connect it with our experience of having been sent back into the church some 14 months ago. And we're also going to connect that with the book of Revelations. So first up, I want to reiterate that Danny and I believe that we have recently entered the time of the tribulation period, spoken of in the book of in the book of Revelation. Now, we do not mean the Great Tribulation, which is also known as the wrath of God. We're talking here about that period when the trumpets are sounded. Now, the 7 trumpets. The trumpets in Israel were always to sound a warning of impending danger. Danger was coming. And it was also to gather the people together to prepare for war. So that's what the tribulation period is about. It's, as I said last time, it's not about how many people God can kill during this period of time. It's about sounding the alarm and getting, especially the church, prepared for war. So the trumpets will be subtle enough that the apostate will be able to ignore them, but they will be evident enough that the ones listening to God will see them and prepare. So I'm going to also provide a link below to a great prophetic word that just came out, and it's worth listening to, especially the first half. The first half is really relevant to what we've been saying in these last 3 videos. So, okay, now having said that, we want to look at this principle in the book of Revelations. Now, bear with us because this all fits together to answer the question as to whether God will send you back to church. And Danny's going to come in a few minutes. I'll just set up this foundation here first. So here in Australia, we recently had the most horrific and unprecedented bushfires, as you would probably have heard. Now, nothing much came from this prophetically, and by that I mean all the well-known prophets were silent on this matter. Very silent. In fact, the silence was... says something. Yeah, the silence says something by itself. God was not using these bushfires as a warning, as he often does with many other things that happen in the world. He uses them as signs pointing to something. Now, he did actually tell me something about it, but I didn't release anything because I didn't feel I had enough information on it, but now I do. So what God told me was that the fires here in Australia was his response to the cry of the martyrs, or the cry of the victims, if you like. Meaning this: for several years here in Australia, we went through a royal commission into institutional responses to child sexual abuse. Now, almost all of the offenders, and certainly all those at the top of the offenders, was just about every denominational church, from Catholic to Salvation Army to the Pentecostals to the mainstream evangelicals and even the Jewish religion. Now, the findings of the Royal Commission was handed down on December 15, 2017. So that was just over 2 years ago. And to date, not one church or one religious organisation or one of these leaders has bothered to apologise to any of the victims, let alone ask forgiveness of these victims, of which there was recorded just under 70,000 of them. Just over 8,000 of them were interviewed and documented, and their documents were presented to the Royal Commission. And those 8,000 were just presented as a representative of the 70,000. Now, nor has one single church done anything to redress and comfort the victims of these horrific devastation inflicted by religious leaders on children in their spiritual care. Now, these violations of God's moral laws committed by church leadership isn't just here in Australia, right? We're very aware of that. This is a worldwide abuse that is taking place. And what has happened is that the cry of the victims have now reached the ears of God. And this cry has initiated the start of the tribulation. And we're going to look at that in the book of Revelations. God is sending his last warnings to the earth. The church will either hear and turn from her wicked ways and back to him, or they'll ignore the signs and set themselves up for the wrath of God. So this is what the fifth seal being opened. This is in Revelations chapter 6. So verse 9 it says, "When he opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of those who had been slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? Then a white robe was given to each of them, and it was said to them that they should rest a little while longer until both the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who would be killed, as it were, was completed." Now, the first thing, a martyr isn't always killed. A martyr is also somebody who suffers for the faith, right? And many of us have been martyred for our faith in God. So the seventh seal. So this is from Revelation 8, which is the prelude to the seven trumpets, right? So the seventh seal opening initiates the seven trumpets. So verse 8, "When he opened the seventh seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour, and I saw the seven angels who stood before God, and to them were given seven trumpets. Then another angel having a golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and threw it to the earth. And there were noises, thunderings, lightnings, and an earthquake. So the seven angels who had the seven trumpets prepared themselves to sound." So there has been an enormous cry go up from the earth, from the martyrs, from the victims, and they are all seeking justice from God. Many of you in the wilderness will have cried those prayers, and God has heard. And it is initiating the beginning of the sounding of the seven trumpets. See, all these church leaders thought that they could do whatever they wanted to the weak and the powerless, and that God wouldn't care and certainly wouldn't act on their behalf. But their cry has initiated the sounding of the seven trumpets. Okay, so what does all this have to do with going back to church? So many of us that have been in the wilderness were victims themselves of all types of church abuse. In the wilderness, God's been healing us of our woundings, and in doing so, cleansing us of all religious activity and our religious spirits and our clinging on to the deceptive doctrines that we had, and strengthening us. Now, if and giving us wisdom as well. Now, if we have responded to the wilderness properly and allowed that cleansing, then we, Danny and I, believe that God is going to use many of us as a bridge in the church between the broken and the victims of the church and the church itself. So we believe that God will use us in the ministry of reconciliation between those that have been victims and those who are church leaders or still in the church. Now, for some of us, that may seem horrific because the last thing we may want to do is go back into the church, which Danny and I didn't either. But, because it's been a source of so much torture for us, certainly I never thought we would go back into the church because we were out of the church for 21 years.
Yeah.
It's a long time. So now Danny's going to join in with us and we'll share what's been happening or not happening with us since we've gone back to
into church. Yeah. Oh, it's interesting because we went back into church and it was trepidation. We didn't know what would happen.
No.
We tried a couple of different churches, but we found this one church that had a very high community feel to it, and it was welcoming and in that welcoming, over the last year, it's been working on us as well to change our precepts. We're going in to tell them what to do and how to do it properly. But we were wrong. We were shown that it's the first thing you have to do is learn about love and community. It's if you go back into a church and start to jump up and down and point, it's going to put a big wall between you and the church. But if you use the church community as a bridge to join in with them, but because church is so comfortable at present, it's the start of the tribulation, which Thena and I both think of. When things start to happen and go wrong and they start to ask questions, and if we're in a relationship with them, we can gently tell them about what God is doing.
We can give them. God actually was specific about the church we were to go to, though. When we prayed about it, it was like this big finger pointing at this church, and we went to the church the first time and this week, and it was really good. But we weren't exactly sure what God was saying, so we went to another church the second week, and it was so horrible. It was so scary. We ran out of there with our tail between our legs, and the following week straight back to that first church. And they've been so lovely. My personal experience, I've never experienced acceptance and love and inclusiveness in a church ever before.
Yes.
I was always in the wilderness and bearing the reproach, and that's what happens. But that's finished now. We're out of the wilderness. As soon as we came out of the wilderness, God said, go back to church. And so we went. And it was, as Danny said, it was horrible. That first week was like the worst. But also, too, it's not been easy. Like, this year's different. But last year, the whole process was, there were times I hated it. I didn't want to be there. And that had nothing to do with the people.
Nothing to do with the people.
Only the institution.
Yeah, because it kept on going about the same things. But
no, it's just the way it's run. It's the whole go in there, sit, everybody faces the front, staring at the back, stand up, sit down, stand up, sit down, stand up, sing 2 songs, sit down, stand up, sing 2 songs, sit down. It's just that whole, you get a bit spoilt in the wilderness too. You can do whatever you want.
Whatever you like. So,
but it feels like kindergarten to go in there and be told to stand up and sit down every 5 minutes, But each time we thought, we won't go again. God hammered us.
Bloody hell. Yeah.
He really just he was like letting us know you will go.
We're going back. That's it. And it's good because this year's been a bit of an eye opener for us, or for me. With what's going on around the world at present, the coronavirus, people are just fearful, getting really fearful and cutting out things and not going anywhere. And we were talking about this at our Bible study, and the leader of the Bible said, "Well, let's go. We'll go to a Chinese restaurant." Because one of our people in the Bible study goes to it, and he was saying that
he works there.
He works there,
and he said there was
no one there.
A day when nobody even came.
So this is our leader, which shamed us, Well, shame me anyway.
No, me too, because we talked about it. We
Yeah,
were talking about how
how-
people were fearful and reacting to it. We didn't have a solution.
Yeah.
But it came up and we were discussing it in the Bible study group, and the leader, without him taking a breath, said, right, we're going to go there for dinner. We're going to organise as many
Thursday night.
people as we can, and we're going to go there for dinner. And I'm thinking, why
So-
didn't I think of that?
So we're learning all the time.
Yeah, we're being
But that's-
confronted every time we have a judgment against them.
It's pushed in our face.
We get confronted. Yeah. So what God has been doing this last year.
It's forming a relationship. And so we're not outsiders. We're not. We've been welcomed in now, and people know that we are stable. Though sometimes we're probably not, but we are stable and reliable people, and so when everything is questioned and people don't know what's happening, we hope to be able to. God will use us to help them along the way.
Yeah, what I want to say about that is when we're in the wilderness, God fills our senses with everything that is wrong with church. All the deception and all the thing that's going on there. What we need to first understand is that it's in us as well, right? It's one of the reasons why we need to be in the wilderness is to strip all that stuff out of us, because we were indoctrinated when we were in the church. All of us were.
Yes.
And so that the only way you can get it, you've got to remove people from the church to get church out of them. And then he'll send us back. Now,
he's sending us back, yeah.
When he first sent us back, he warned us. He said, go back. He said, be humble, be kind. And he gave us that scripture about, don't think yourself great and sit down the front because someone greater might come and blah, blah, blah. Now, we never sit down the front. No. We are back row people. We've always been. But I knew what God was saying. He wasn't literally saying don't sit down the front. He was saying don't go with that attitude that you think you're so great. However, and we did. So we thought.
So we thought.
As we went along, we realised we did have an attitude. We still had an attitude. I think we thought that we were going to be like Jesus, who took a whip and went in there and chased out all the money lenders and all that. I think we thought we had that attitude. And the interesting thing is that even though we've been there 14 months, they know nothing about us. Yeah. They don't know we have a YouTube channel. They don't know I've written a book. They don't know we have a prophetic gifting. They know nothing. No one has grabbed the edge of our shirt and said, oh, my God, God is with you. We are not standing out in any way, shape or form. We're just these people, who come in and sit up the back and then leave. But we've forged some really, really, really good relationships with people and even with the pastor. The pastor, he's a very good man.
Very good man.
Yeah, and, we've seen no deceptions there. They're not... push the tithing. They have a really good outlook on giving, don't they? It's almost a celebration rather than a bondage thing, yeah. And and they're very loving and inclusive, even for the broken people who come in and stuff like that. They're very good. We're really happy to. Never thought there would be a church that we would be. So happy to be at. So
this is what we're talking about being a bridge, a bridge from the old wineskin into whatever the new wineskin is that God's going to bring along. Not making any, things up, but there's going to be a new covenant that's coming. That's going to come.
And just the other thing I want to say about church, which you did talk about, but I just want to hone in a bit more, is that and I'll talk about from my perspective, every time I form a judgment, which we're very good at doing, when we're in the wilderness, we can, form judgments and go, I've written people off because I thought they were deceived or whatever. Every time I've been doing that lately, whether it be on the internet or whether it be in the church,
same here.
something will happen and that person will shame me. Not deliberately or anything. They won't even know that I've been shamed. But they will say something and I will feel ashamed because it shows that there's a greaterness in them that's in me. And he's been breaking down everything that I thought that I was allowed to judge when I was in the wilderness. Now back in the church, God is pulling that wall down. And the wall has to come down if we're to be a bridge.
Yes.
We can't go in there thinking that we're greater than them. There is one other thing I want to talk about, and that is that there is no us and them. Right? I talk about in my book about the universal invisible church as opposed to the visible local church. The visible local church is the church building where we go in for services and that. The invisible universal church is the priesthood of all believers that, it's worldwide from all nations, tribes and tongues. That's the one that that's the one that Jesus sees as his church. They may be in churches, they may not be in churches. Not everyone can go to a church. Not every country allows churches and church services, So the priesthood of all believers is all those that are given over to God and who are following them with all their passion and their heart and everything. Now, the thing is, so there is no us and them, right? There's just the priesthood of all believers, be they in a church or not in a church. The thing is, what has happened is that the church, and for those of us that had to leave church, and most of us, even though we're in the wilderness and we have not wanted to go back to church, we got to that place where we no longer wanted to go back to church. There was a time when we were in church and we were devoted. We were devoted to the fellowship and we were passionate about serving God in those areas. But whatever happened, it came to a place where we were left with no option but to leave.
Yep.
And then out in the wilderness, we developed an attitude towards church, mainly because of what God was showing us that was negative about the church. The thing is, when we left the church had this attitude towards us, that we were heretics, that we had abandoned Jesus, we'd forsaken him because we preferred the world. We were outcasts, we were, backslidden, we were, you've heard it all, right? And they still have this attitude about the wilderness and people who are outside the church. They still see them as being less than, and they are them. They aren't us. But conversely, the wilderness people have also, the wilderness community who gather together and share each other's things and like that through the internet, we've also developed an attitude towards them. They're the heretics. They're the ones who are in deception. Us, we're the ones out here. God's not going to judge us. He's going to judge those in the church. No, God's going to judge the invisible church, the invisible universal, the priesthood of all believers. We are all going to have to be accountable for what we're doing. So there's no us and them. And so if we get taken back into church, the barriers have got to go. We cannot be a bridge if the barriers are there. You want to share something?
It's just that we come to the end, and if you get a chance, Stephen's going to put a link up, but also have a chance to read Thessalonians 5, 12 to 24. It's all about bridge building.
Yeah, it is actually. So, that's the attitude of the bridge builder.
Yes.
Yeah, that is.
So God bless.
Yeah. We'll be back.
Yep.
There's more to be said on this. So bless you on your journeys. If you have any questions or any comments that you want to contribute, feel free to do that below. It was really interesting. Someone shared with us after the last video that God had told them that they were a bridge builder. So I think that's really interesting because God is
working it out.
yeah, and that was another wilderness person that's going to be who felt that God was saying they were going back into church. So, God is preparing a people to do that. Okay, so bless you all.
True.